You know that feeling when someone walks all over you and you just smile and take it, telling yourself you are being the bigger person, that you are choosing peace over conflict, that being kind means never standing your ground. You convince yourself this is what good men do, what civilized people do, what Stoicism teaches. But deep down, there is this gnawing sensation, this quiet voice that whispers you are not being noble, you are being a doormat. What if I told you that Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the ancient world, a philosopher king who commanded legions and ruled an empire, understood something about power and predation that completely contradicts everything modern society has taught you about being nice? Today, we are diving into a Stoic principle so misunderstood, so twisted by contemporary culture, that when you finally grasp its true meaning, it will fundamentally transform how you move through the world. By the end of this video, you will discover why nice men finish last, how ancient Roman wisdom reveals the path to becoming unstoppable, and most importantly, the single realization that separates prey from predator in every aspect of life. This is not about becoming cruel or abandoning your humanity. This is about understanding that true strength, the kind that makes men legendary, requires something our modern world has forgotten how to cultivate. Let me paint you a picture of who Marcus Aurelius really was, because the sanitized version we get in philosophy classes misses the entire point. Here was a man who spent years on the frontier, sleeping in military camps, watching men die from disease and battle, making decisions that determined whether thousands lived or perished. He was not sitting in some ivory tower contemplating the nature of virtue while sipping wine. He was covered in the dust and blood of the real world, commanding armies, executing traitors, and holding together an empire that was constantly under threat from both external enemies and internal decay. Marcus Aurelius understood something that gets lost when people quote him on Instagram over pictures of sunsets. That philosophy without power is just pretty words, and power without philosophy is just tyranny. The Stoic emperor had to be both philosopher and predator, thinker and warrior, because anything less would have been a betrayal of his responsibilities. In his private writings, what we now call meditations, Marcus repeatedly returns to this tension between his desire for tranquility and the brutal demands of leadership. He writes about controlling his anger, yes, but he also writes about the necessity of swift, decisive action against those who threaten the common good. This is the paradox at the heart of Stoicism that modern interpreters either miss or deliberately ignore, that the same philosophy teaching you to accept what you cannot control also demands you act with overwhelming force on what you can control. Think about the modern nice guy for a moment, the man who never rocks the boat, who always defers to others, who prides himself on never causing conflict. Society celebrates this man, calls him evolved, emotionally intelligent, a good person. But watch what actually happens to him. He gets passed over for promotions because he never fights for what he deserves. Women find him pleasant but not attractive because there is no edge, no danger, no sense that he could protect anything, including himself. Other men do not respect him because respect, real respect, is earned through demonstrated capability and the willingness to enforce boundaries. This nice guy tells himself he is following Stoic principles, that he is choosing reason over emotion, peace over violence, acceptance over resistance. But Marcus Aurelius would have looked at this man with something between pity and contempt, because this is not Stoicism, this is cowardice, wearing philosophy as a disguise. The real Stoic teaching, the one that creates unstoppable men, is radically different and far more dangerous. Here is the law that changes everything, the principle that Marcus Aurelius lived by and that transformed him from a philosopher into a force of nature. You must be more dangerous than your enemies, more capable of violence than those who would harm you, more ruthless in pursuing your objectives than anyone standing in your way. But you must choose not to unleash that capacity except when absolutely necessary. Read that again, because it is the opposite of what you have been taught. Modern society tells you to be harmless and calls that goodness. Marcus Aurelius understood that being harmless just makes you a victim, that real virtue requires the capacity for controlled aggression, that the only thing stopping a dangerous man from destroying you is his choice to restrain himself. This is why the Roman emperor could be simultaneously the philosopher, writing about universal love and brotherhood, while also ordering the execution of traitors and the crushing of rebellions. There was no contradiction in his mind because he understood that protecting the good requires the capacity and willingness to destroy the bad. Let me make this concrete because abstract philosophy does not change behavior. When you walk into a room and everyone immediately knows you are not to be trifled with, not because you are aggressive, but because there is something in your bearing that suggests crossing you would be a serious mistake. That is the law in action. When you negotiate and the other party senses that while you prefer a fair deal, you are perfectly prepared to walk away or even burn the whole thing down if they push too far, that is the law in action. When you love someone deeply but they know without question that disrespect or betrayal will result in your immediate and total withdrawal, that is the law in action. You are not trying to be intimidating, you are not posturing or threatening, you are simply living from a place of such deep self-respect and capability that others instinctively understand the boundaries. This is what Marcus Aurelius meant when he wrote about being like a rock that the waves keep crashing over. It stands unmoved. The rock is not soft, it is not yielding, it is not trying to make the waves happy. The rock is so fundamentally solid that the waves exhaust themselves against it. Now here is where it gets interesting because this principle creates a paradox that confuses people. The more dangerous you become, the more capable of destruction, the less you actually need to use that capacity. It is the harmless nice guy who constantly finds himself in conflicts because predators in human form can sense weakness from a mile away. They test boundaries, push limits, take advantage, because there are no consequences. But the man who has cultivated real power, who has made himself formidable, finds that people naturally give him respect and space. Why? Because everyone understands at some level that forcing a confrontation with someone truly dangerous is a losing proposition even if you win. Marcus Aurelius rarely had to resort to overt displays of power precisely because everyone understood the power was there. His word was enough, because behind that word stood legions, stood execution blocks, stood the full weight of Roman authority. The emperor could afford to be philosophical and measured precisely because no one doubted what would happen to those who betrayed or threatened Rome. Let me ask you something, and I want you to really think about this before you answer. When was the last time someone disrespected you and you let it slide, telling yourself you were being the bigger person? When was the last time you said yes when you wanted to say no because you did not want to seem difficult? When was the last time you watched someone take credit for your work, flirt with your partner, undermine you socially, and you just smiled through it? Every single one of those moments, you were not practicing stoicism, you were practicing submission. You were teaching the world that you are safe to exploit, that there are no consequences for crossing you, that your boundaries are suggestions rather than laws. And the truly brutal truth is this: you cannot command respect from a position of harmlessness. You can only beg for kindness and hope people choose to give it. Marcus Aurelius never begged, never hoped, never relied on the goodwill of others because he had made himself into someone whose displeasure carried weight. If you have ever felt that frustration, that anger at being overlooked or disrespected, that sense that life is not giving you what you deserve, then what I'm about to share is crucial. The path forward is not about being nicer, more understanding, or more accommodating. The path forward is about becoming dangerous in the most controlled and purposeful way possible. And before you think this sounds aggressive or toxic, understand that every great protector in history, every man who successfully defended something worth defending, was dangerous. Your grandfather who fought in a war, dangerous. The firefighter who runs into burning buildings, dangerous. The surgeon who cuts into human bodies, dangerous. The entrepreneur who bankrupts competitors, dangerous. Danger is not the same as cruelty. Violence is not the same as evil. Power is not the same as abuse. These are deliberate conflations designed to keep men weak and compliant. If this resonates with you, if you are tired of watching from the sidelines while more aggressive men take what they want, then make sure you are subscribed to this channel because we dive deep into these ancient principles that modern society wants you to forget. So how do you actually become this kind of man? How do you transform from prey into predator while maintaining your humanity and ethics? Marcus Aurelius gives us the roadmap in his Meditations, but you have to read between the lines because he was writing for himself, not for an audience. First, you must cultivate real capability in the domains that matter. For Marcus, this meant military skill, political acumen, rhetorical ability, and philosophical wisdom. For you, in the modern world, this means becoming genuinely competent at your craft, building your body into something formidable, developing your mind through serious study, and acquiring practical skills that make you valuable and difficult to replace. Notice I said real capability, not the performance of capability. The world is full of men who talk a good game, but fold the moment things get difficult. Predators do not need to announce themselves. Their results speak for them. Second, you must embrace conflict as a necessary part of life rather than something to be avoided. Marcus Aurelius spent almost his entire reign at war because peace was not an option when barbarians were literally at the gates. He did not cause these conflicts, but he did not shrink from them either. Every difficult conversation you avoid, every boundary you fail to enforce, every time you let something slide to keep the peace, you are training yourself to be weak. The Stoic approach is not to seek conflict, but to meet it with such overwhelming competence and resolve that it ends quickly and decisively. This is why Marcus wrote about acting with speed and conviction, because hesitation and half measures just prolong suffering. When you finally do stand your ground, do it completely. No passive aggression, no subtle manipulation, no covert contracts. Direct, clear, immovable. Third, and this is crucial, you must separate your self-worth from other people's approval. Marcus Aurelius had power that most men cannot even imagine, yet he constantly reminded himself that fame and status are ultimately meaningless compared to character and virtue. Why does this matter? Because as long as you need other people to like you, as long as you are seeking approval and validation, you will always be manipulable. Predators do not need to be liked, they need to be effective. This does not mean being an asshole for no reason. It means being willing to be disliked when standing your ground matters more than being popular. The emperor knew that many people feared him, some hated him, but his job was not to be loved. It was to preserve civilization. Your job is not to make everyone comfortable. It is to build something worth building and protect what matters. Now let me address the obvious question. Does this mean you should be cold, calculating, and ruthless all the time? Absolutely not. And this is where people misunderstand the entire framework. Marcus Aurelius was known for his kindness, his patience with others, his willingness to forgive and give second chances. But, and this is critical, his kindness came from a position of strength, not weakness. He could afford to be generous, because no one mistook his generosity for exploitability. He could afford to be patient because everyone understood that patience was a choice he was making, not a weakness they could exploit. This is the difference between nice guys and good men. Nice guys are kind because they are afraid of conflict. Good men are kind because they have the power to be cruel but choose otherwise. Can you see how completely different these are? One inspires contempt, the other inspires reverence. Here is something Marcus wrote that most people read completely wrong. He says you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. People interpret this as meaning you should just accept whatever happens and focus on your internal state. But read it in context with his actual life and the meaning shifts. Marcus is saying that you cannot control everything, but you absolutely can control your response, and your response includes the actions you take. When barbarians invaded Roman territory, Marcus did not just meditate on acceptance. He raised armies and destroyed them. When advisors betrayed him, he did not just work on his inner peace, he removed them from power. The control over your mind that he is talking about includes the decision to act with force when force is required. The strength he is referring to is not passive endurance, it is active capability. Let me tell you what happens when you actually start living this way. First, you will lose people from your life, and that is not a bug, that is a feature. People who were comfortable with the old you, the accommodating you, the nice guy you, will not like this version. They will call you changed, aggressive, an asshole. Let them leave because they were benefiting from your weakness. Second, you will face tests, lots of them, because people need to know if this new boundary is real or just posturing. This is where most men fail. They establish a boundary, someone tests it, and they fold to avoid conflict. But if you hold firm, if you demonstrate through action that your boundaries are laws, not suggestions, the tests stop, and respect begins. Third, you will discover capacities within yourself that you did not know existed because you have been keeping yourself small and safe for so long. There is a version of you that is powerful, dangerous, and unstoppable, and that version has been waiting for permission to emerge. Marcus Aurelius understood something about human nature that our modern world has forgotten. People do not actually want everyone to be equal and safe and nice. Deep down, people are drawn to hierarchy, to power, to individuals who have mastered themselves and their domains. This is why we still read about Alexander the Great, why we make movies about warriors and conquerors, why women are attracted to dangerous men who have tamed themselves, rather than safe men who were never dangerous to begin with. The entire story of civilization is the story of powerful men building things and other powerful men trying to tear them down, with everyone else benefiting from or suffering under the results. Marcus was not trying to eliminate hierarchy or power, he was trying to ensure that power was held by philosophical men rather than tyrants, that strength was guided by wisdom rather than mere ambition. So what is the final insight, the realization that transforms everything? It is this: you already have the capacity for everything I have described, the danger, the power, the unstoppable drive. It is not something you need to acquire from outside yourself. It is something you need to stop suppressing. Every man has an inner predator, a part of him that wants to dominate his domain, destroy his enemies, take what he wants and protect what he loves with overwhelming force. Society has spent your entire life teaching you to fear that part of yourself, to lock it away, to pretend it does not exist. But Marcus Aurelius integrated his predator. He gave it philosophy and purpose and direction, and that integration is what made him legendary. The nice guy suppresses his aggression and calls it virtue. The asshole expresses his aggression without wisdom and calls it strength. The Stoic, the real Stoic, acknowledges his capacity for destruction and chooses when and how to deploy it with such precision that it becomes a scalpel rather than a hammer. You are standing at a choice point right now. You can continue being nice, continue hoping that kindness and accommodation will eventually be rewarded, continue believing that the world will recognize your goodness and give you what you deserve. Or you can accept that the world is not fair, that nice guys do finish last, that power respects power and nothing else, and then make the decision to become someone who cannot be ignored, cannot be exploited, cannot be stopped. Not through cruelty, but through cultivated capability. Not through aggression, but through the willingness to enforce consequences. Not through violence, but through the unmistakable presence of someone who could be violent, but chooses otherwise. This is what Marcus Aurelius teaches. This is what transforms nice men into unstoppable forces. This is the Stoic Law that changes everything. The question is not whether you are capable of this transformation. The question is whether you are finally ready to stop making excuses and become who you were always meant to be. So what will it be? Will you remain prey or will you become predator? The choice, as always, is yours.